Hello, my name is Sarah, and I am your chakra coach. On this podcast, we'll be exploring how the chakra system can help guide you to grow your emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual wellness, leading you closer to your highest self. Hello and welcome. I am so glad you've joined me today. I mean, other than the fact that I'm always glad you're here, which I am, I'm also thrilled that you get to listen to this conversation I had with Dr. Liz Carter about Chinese medicine. You'll hear it in the episode. I am such a fan of her work. I discovered her on Instagram and I was just so impressed by her knowledge and her willingness to share it. I mean, she has all her free content and she has courses and she has a practice. And if you're a Chinese medicine practitioner or an acupuncturist, she has courses for you too, specifically about 5-element practices, which we will discuss at length in the show. But before I tell you about her, I'm going to ask you for my weekly favor, and that's to please go into your favorite podcast app to rate and or review the show. And if you're not already following or subscribing, whatever your platform calls it, please go ahead and do that so that you don't miss an episode. These little things really help me out. They help the show out, and they probably don't seem like a big deal to you, but they really, really do matter. So if you would do that, I'd appreciate it. So back to Dr. Liz. She is so smart and she's so cool. And in the conversation, I call her a genius. And I I think it embarrassed her a little, but really, I mean, she takes these concepts that can be so broad and intimidating, and she makes them understandable and practical. Dr. Liz is a licensed naturopathic doctor and an acupuncturist who has been practicing in the Seattle area since 2011. She's been teaching online courses about Chinese medicine and naturopathic medicine since 2019, and she loves helping people feel empowered, engaged, and excited about their health. Her passion is helping people find the root cause of their issues and supporting them through the mental, emotional, and spirit-based challenges of modern life. You can probably see why I like her so much. Some fun facts about Dr. Liz. She has a giant black cat named Marvin. She has a very funny husband who helps her take her own life less seriously. She enjoys quilting, and she loves reading novels that involve witches. I don't know. I thought that was really fun. Anyway, I think you're going to love her as much as I do. Remember to follow her on all the socials, go to her website, learn more about her, learn more about you and your element, and see how Chinese medicine can improve your health. Here's Dr. Liz. Dr. Liz, welcome to the show. I am so excited to have you here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. Yeah, it's sunny and beautiful here in Seattle. These are the prettiest months of the year for sure. So I'm really soaking it up.
Absolutely. Yeah. To me, sunshine makes a huge difference. So I really feel like I thrive in the summer months and I kind of don't so much in the winter months.
I don't know. Yeah, I hear that.
Maybe that has to do with my element. We'll get into it. You are an acupuncturist and an expert in Chinese medicine. I talked about it in the intro, but would you be willing to give us sort of a primer on Chinese medicine? I mean, what is it and why should we pay attention to it?
Yeah, I think one of the most important aspects to realize about Chinese medicine is that it is so much more than just acupuncture. I think that's the piece that people are the most familiar with. And then on top of that, they're really familiar with the fact that acupuncture treats pain effectively. That's the thing that we all know and has been studied the most. The thing that people don't realize is how much Chinese medicine was designed to treat. It is a full system of medicine that can treat everything from allergies and asthma to constipation to autoimmune issues, all kinds of things. So it's really nice to kind of broaden that scope in terms of, hey, I wonder if it can help me with this. The answer is probably yes, it can. And the great thing about it is that it's been around for at least 2,000 years. So the protocols that exist, many of them are time tested, which is wonderful, to have that kind of traditional knowledge base that's been there forever.
Yeah, I sometimes feel like medicine is a guessing game, right? I go to the doctor and I'm like, these are my symptoms. And they're like, it could be one of these 20 things. Let's just throw it at the wall and see what sticks. And some of it just doesn't have maybe that sort of depth of history. And that is one of the things that really um, intrigued me, because the chakra system, of course, is also very, very ancient and yet still highly, highly relevant. So tell us a little bit about Chinese medicine and its relevance today. How does one even practice it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what drew me into Chinese medicine too, in understanding just how relevant it is, in that it's very much so based in the principles of Taoism and naturalism, which basically means that humans are an integral part of nature and they are united with nature. So nature is us and we are nature. So to see Chinese medicine in your life, especially the five elements, you can literally look out a window and see, what's going on with the trees and how are they growing and what's happening, and what happens if they have if there's a big rainstorm and there's too much water and it washes away some earth, or if it's too dry and the earth sucks up all the water. All of that is a metaphor for both our internal system, our health, and our personality and how we interact with other people. It's pretty wild.
That sounds incredible. So you mentioned the five elements. I'd like to go a little bit more in depth about that. So they're the five elements in nature, but we also find the five elements in us.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and so the five elements are wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. So if you've ever seen a symbol of the five elements, they form a circle. So they're all connected via a circle. And then there's a star pattern in the middle of that circle. And what we see with that pattern is that every single element is connected to every single other element. So there's this beautiful, amazing intricacy that happens where we can see the elemental interactions, again, through nature, in our bodies, and then within ourselves. I think I answered your question.
You did, and I'm going to ask a follow-up. So when I think about, say, like the wood element, does that relate to specific structures in my body?
Yes, it does. Yep. Each element has physical correlations, and then it also has mental and emotional correlations. So yeah. So for your wood element, especially, tendons and connective tissue are a really big part of that. The liver, which is an organ of the wood element, your two organs of wood are liver and gallbladder. The liver opens to the eyes. So if we have imbalances in the wood element, we also see it in eye issues sometimes. And then we have emotions associated with the elements. So the emotion of wood is anger. So if your wood element is out of balance, or you're a wood element person, you tend to be a little bit more on that irritable, quick to anger kind of spectrum, more so than other folks.
Fascinating. Tell us about sort of the others in that brief way you just did. So what about fire?
Yeah, fire is it's a really interesting one, because it has four organs associated with it rather than two. So we've got heart and small intestine. So a little bit about heart in Chinese medicine. That is the most important organ of the body. It's known as the emperor of the body, and it rules over all of the other organs. It also houses our spirit, known as the Shen. So it's a super important organ, and it has a lot to do with anxiety, and its emotion is joy. So if we have too much joy, it's a problem. If we have too little joy, it's a problem. In Chinese medicine, everything is about balance. So we want to essentially rebalance the elements so they're working in harmony within you together. Small intestine, mentally and emotionally and physically, is about sorting out your life. If there's any confusion, small intestine is sometimes a part of that issue. And then we have pericardium, which is about boundaries and relationships usually, and it's a protective sac around our heart. And then we have sanjiao, which is kind of it's harder to understand in Western conception. The closest thing we understand is that it's like circulation essentially, and mentally and emotionally it senses the vibe in the room, which is kind of fun to think
Nice.
about.
Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
love that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
then let's see, there was also metal.
Yeah. So metal is associated with lung and large intestine. So lungs emotion is grief. So that can be a big thing for metal people, or if you're grieving, you know that your lungs are going to be a little bit more stressed. Lungs are also associated with the immune system and skin. So if we have anything that's stressing the lungs, sometimes it will show up on the skin for us. And large intestine is all about the balance between holding on and letting go, of course, mentally, emotionally, and physically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So it's got a really big job. It's kind of the garbage man of the body. Nobody really likes to have to do that job, but man, it's important. And if it doesn't get done, we're going to notice it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So that's, yeah. And metals in nature, I think fire and wood are pretty intuitive. Metal is mineral or rock. So it's really nice to think about it in the form of like a mountain. And then metal is also whatever you can find in the mountain that's mineral. So like precious gemstones, precious metals, that's all associated with the metal element, including, of course, the tools and things that we can make from metal.
Fascinating. And then,
Mm-hmm.
oh, now I feel like I'm going to lose it. Water?
Water. Yep. No, you're doing great. Yeah.
It's a quiz.
Yeah. Right. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so water element is associated with kidneys and bladder, which makes a ton of sense, right? Because we know Western wise they process a lot of water in our body. So the emotion of the water element is fear. So that will come up pretty strongly if you're a water element individual. Sometimes people are kind of ruled by fear and they kind of stay really conservative in their life. And other times water people become a little bit more fearless on that spectrum. So they're kind of like the adrenaline junkies, the skydiving, that
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
thing. And then, yeah, bladder is also, it helps to regulate fluidity in the body, essentially, physically, mentally, and emotionally. So like if you're stuck in shock or fright, which happens in fear, the bladder is the one that kind of helps to move you out of that and regulate. Yeah. Yeah. And then I think the last one is earth, which is great. Earth is it's a really beautiful element. Sometimes in the 5 element tradition, you see earth as part of that circle. And then sometimes you see it at the center of the circle. And that's what it does. It centers and grounds everything. And it can do that for the other elements. So it's associated mainly with our digestion, with organs, spleen, and stomach. The spleen is your biggest digestive organ in Chinese medicine, which is very weird compared to the Western conception of it. It also kind of like includes pancreatic functions in a Western sense, and even some hormonal. So the emotion of the earth element is worry. So sometimes if we're in that mode, we can kind of obsess and ruminate over one thing. And then the stomach's job is kind of that churning and breaking things down mentally and emotionally. And I think a lot of times what people don't realize is that those organs are not only digesting your food, they're digesting your thoughts and
Mm-hmm.
emotions and environment. So it's very easy for them to get overwhelmed, especially in modern day where we have so much stimulation all the time. And then people wonder why digestion is a little bit off or
Yeah.
struggling. That can
Why
be
do
a
we
big
all have
reason.
leaky gut syndrome and
Right,
all that good stuff?
right,
Um,
absolutely.
how do we how do we know which is our dominant element? I mean, I took your quiz on your website, which was very informative. Um, how do you know which one you're dominant in, or and what does that mean when you discover, oh, I'm a wood person, oh, I'm a earth person?
Yeah, I think so. The ways to discover it, I mean, the most accurate by far is to go see a 5 element acupuncturist because that's literally their job is to diagnose your elements and to give you treatments to help balance them. And then there are things that exist online like my quiz and probably a few others where, because we're self-evaluating, it can be a little bit less accurate. But it's still a good place to start. And then, there are a few kind of books that explain the elements a little bit in depth, and you can read about that and go through it. But yeah, it can be very hard to figure out your dominant element in the beginning because they all kind of seem like, oh, I have aspects of all of those. And I always tell people, I think that's really healthy when you can see yourself in multiple elements. I think it's much more worrisome to me as a practitioner if somebody is like, no, I can really only understand wood and they're very wood element, because that generally means that they have been in that state for so long that that's how they've been living, that's all they understand, and they don't have that internal balance that maybe some other people do.
I will say, as I was taking the quiz, occasionally I would say, "Oh, this answer I feel like is my natural tendency. This is the thing I actually do when I'm out in the world."
Yeah.
And so what you're saying about it can be very difficult to self-evaluate. I think it really rings true to me because I was like, if I had my choice, this is the behavior I would engage in, or this is what I would do. But my job or the expectations of society don't allow me to do that. And so really, this is my actual behavior. Um, so I guess then the answer, if I'm answering a quiz like yours, I should really go with my natural tendency, the thing that I would prefer.
Yeah, I think so. Even if we're maybe like a little ashamed of it or unsure, yes, if it's your first instinct, that's probably what you want to go with because you're right, all of those social pressures. And then we put on different personas in different aspects of our lives. And sure, we can definitely show up more like a wood element in one aspect and then more like an earth element in another. And then, I think something that's really important to understand about the elements too is that we are born with our primary one and then we kind of come into our secondary where we learn it generally at about 2 or 3 years old from our primary caregivers, but in the sense people feel like, man, is this fixed, is this all I have in life? And while they do stay the same over your lifetime, that doesn't mean that how you interact with them will always be the same. There's a lot of people who invest heavily in personal growth end up being the hardest for me to personally diagnose when they come in because they have access to all five and they can hop into like multiple spaces, and that's a really beautiful thing. So you all everyone carries all five within them.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that we tend to have one or two that are more dominant in our life, and that can be really, really helpful to understand in depth because then we understand how we respond to stress. We understand how we like to be communicated with. Maybe some relationship issues clear up because, yeah, we understand other people if we know the five elements too. So they can be just massively transformative. I know they were in my life when I learned them. They're such a wonderful tool to have. Mm-hmm.
And from sort of engaging with your content, my understanding is the idea is not to be like everybody's goal isn't to be perfectly balanced 20% each of the five elements. The idea is to live in harmony with your natural tendencies, with the input of these other elements. So if you're dominant in one area, that's fine. You should just go ahead and be dominant in that area. There's no pressure within the Chinese medicine tradition to change.
Right. Yes, and that brings up another piece that I think is really important to understand about the elements themselves. I look at the elements as a filter or a defense mechanism. They don't truly represent our authentic selves, right? So there's something that we tend to engage with, especially when we're talking about like psychological and behavioral patterns. We engage with them when maybe we feel threatened or we feel stressed. Like that's just what we go to, especially in the extreme responses that we can have, down an element path. It's important to know that when you do feel more balanced, it's almost like you have a breath of space to think and say like, hey, do I really want to go back down that path, or do I have another option at hand that actually fits the situation better? So in that way, yeah, it's not set in stone. I'm not sure I totally answered your question, but hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea is much like, Ayurveda in the the Hindu tradition. Like the idea is to be balanced within yourself, not balanced to some sort of standardized norm, which honestly I also feel like is another distinction between these ancient practices and Western medicine, where they give me a chart and they're like, this is normal, you deviate. Whereas there's a lot more room for a lot more normals in this discipline. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, I absolutely. I think instead of being like strict categories as well, I think elements and balance is about fluidity, right? It means that there's adaptation within your system where if you have extreme stress for a while, yeah, you might really rely on that element for a long time. And the key is to maybe
Mm.
have enough self-help and tools to back you out of that behavioral pattern once you're through that stressful time in your life, rather than some people, getting kind of locked into that response. And that is something I see pretty commonly in new patients who come to see me, where I talk about it like, you feel like you're a hamster on a wheel and you'd really like to get off the wheel. You're aware of that, but you just can't. You keep kind of acting in this way that might not be in your own self-best interest, that kind of thing. And it's just, yeah, sometimes we get locked into those patterns. When really, yeah, we need to get back to that fluid adaptability, moving in and out of these different energies that we have access to.
That definitely answered my question. Thank you.
Sure.
And that really sort of leads me to my next set of questions, which was we obviously Chinese medicine is famous for healing pain, right? That's, I think, a lot of people's first introduction. They're like, I've just had this hip pain forever and I'm trying everything, and that's how they find it. And so I was going to ask, can it be used for emotional and psychological and mental healing? But I think you've answered that question. Yes. If we present with physical symptoms, say I come to you with a stomach or digestive issue, how do you use Chinese medicine to help diagnose and heal a physical ailment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think, what's interesting too is that the medicine before, we'll get a little history lesson here, before 1960, it was known as classical Chinese medicine. And all of that was integrated: mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, which is wonderful. During the Communist Revolution, the medicine was kind of split. So we ended up with something called TCM, which is known as traditional Chinese medicine, which unfortunately is not totally traditional. It's a modernization of classical Chinese medicine. And the way they chose to modernize it was to get rid of anything, quote unquote, spiritual or superstitious. So TCM is actually a lot more physically based and focused on physical pain, which is by far the dominant form of acupuncture that people are trained in China and then in the US as well. 5-element acupuncture is also not traditional. It started in the 1970s. It is another adaptation for the modern Western world. That one kind of picks up the pieces where that is much more mentally, emotionally, and spiritually based. So that's why I had a mentor in school who practiced both, and he practices a bit more in the classical technique. So that's kind of why I ended up doing what I'm doing. So I think that's a really important piece if you are looking for somebody, if you're like, okay, my symptoms are predominantly physical, maybe I want to go TCM, or they're predominantly mental, emotional, maybe I want to go 5E, to find practitioners that way. But, I've also had several severe pain cases come in and done only 5-element work, and that's what helps them. So, and that's the beautiful thing about Chinese medicine too. And when certain points, you can't separate out the functionality of each point. When I put a point in, it has a mental, emotional, and physical function. Some are more heavily physically based, and some are much more mentally and emotionally based. So knowing those differences can be really great. And your intention and how you use them with the patient is also really important. Yeah, did that answer your question?
It absolutely did. Do you have something to say that the world needs to hear? Of course you do. If you want to turn your ideas into a podcast, Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere, and even earn a little money. All in one place, for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer. So no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free with no catch. I like it because it's easy to use and to get support when I need it. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
Instacart helps you get beer and wine delivered in as fast as an hour. So, whether you need to fill the cooler for tailgate season or fill your glass for Pinot by the Fire season, you can save time by getting fall sips delivered in just a few clicks. Visit instacart.com or download the app to get free delivery on your first 3 orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Minimum order $10. Additional terms apply. Must be 21 or over for alcohol delivery where available. Instacart. Add life to cart.
Do you find that a lot of people's physical symptoms are actually at their root a psychological or emotional cause? And that's why
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that would happen a lot.
I think, yes, you're 100% right. Reading, from a 5-element perspective, the founder, estimated that about 90% of ailments in the Western world specifically, right, because we're not struggling in the same way that maybe other parts of the world are mentally and emotionally based. And if you can get to that mental and emotional root, a lot of times physical things will improve. And I do see that time and time again in my practice, where if we can balance those core elements, I look at that as kind of like a supportive and nourishing treatment that rebuilds the body so it can actually go heal what it needs to heal. I'm not really telling it, go do the stomach or go help this tendon. Sometimes I am, but a lot of times it's just getting that base level of nourishment up for the body to do its magical healing thing.
Yeah, sometimes I think the body knows what to do if we can just sort of get out of its way.
100%. Absolutely. To me, that's like 90% of my job right there. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember reading something about specifically back pain and like people who'd been living with, on a scale of 1 to 10, level 9 back pain forever, when they could get their emotional attachment or struggle with the pain under control, that pain level would drop to like 2 or 3. And that was actually the physical portion of it, was this very, very small part. And I feel like that's kind of what you're specifically addressing, is all of those psychological components, because they really are inseparable. I think that's it's really neat. So, I mean, I know acupuncture is a treatment modality, acupressure, right? Those are the famous ones. What are other modalities that you use?
So I'm a little bit unique because I'm also a naturopathic doctor. So I integrate that into my treatments. So I will use a lot of naturopathic modalities in terms of counseling, diet and lifestyle. We've got herbs, we've got homeopathy. Most acupuncturists are trained in Chinese herbs. I am not, so I don't have that wonderful medicine at my fingertips. But Chinese medicine wise, I'd say my main tools really are acupuncture, and then educating people about Chinese medicine and how it impacts their lives, and the correlations between what they're experiencing in their body, what I'm doing in treatment, and what that means for their health overall.
One thing that you talk a lot about on Instagram is timing, how different organs are related to different times of day. I think different elements have different times of day. Would you share just a little bit about that? Because I feel like that's really a unique way to look at the body as a system.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. And it's super helpful. It's it's a system called the Chinese clock, and each organ, which we have 12 of in Chinese medicine, is associated with a different 2-hour period on the clock. So it's really helpful to understand, for example, if your liver, the highest time of liver is 1 to 3 a.m. and wood as an organ and liver as an organ loves to like grow and move and do. So it's a really common time for people to wake up and like want to be productive, or just even have trouble like settling in from their day ahead of time, or they wake up angry because the liver is associated with anger. It's also a common time for blood sugar issues, for people to get a blood sugar drop and wake up, especially if they've had alcohol, because that liver is struggling to process. So there's a lot. If you have certain symptoms at certain times of day, that's one of the things I always run people through, where I'm like, oh, does this always happen at this time? Are you always tired now? Or do you always have gas and bloating now? And then I look at which organ is correlated with that. And that leads me to maybe not their constitutional or core element, but it could be that, or it could be a layer of an element that is out of balance for them that we need to address.
Very interesting. So let's say it's liver. Now I sleep from 1 to 3 pretty well myself. Does that mean my liver's doing great, or does that mean like my liver is a problem?
No, if you're not waking up and you're not having any issues, that usually means it's great. The liver is also, and wood element is associated with planning and overall vision and perspective. So it's wonderful that it's during the most restorative time of night with sleeping, is that if you are not disturbed during those hours, you're allowing your liver to do all of this planning and orchestrating and making sure everything in your body is running smoothly behind the scenes.
Does that mean we should be planning our days around our organs and what they need? I mean, how do you do something like that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, obviously depends on schedule flexibility, of course, but it is really nice to understand, especially if you know your core elements, to understand. We'll just go with wood element again. You know, the liver and gallbladder are the most active from 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. Wood element people do have a tendency to stay up later because they feel good during that organ time. For wood element people, it can be really, really important if you're feeling like you're short on sleep, or for anybody with an out of balance wood element, to try to cut that off and go to bed by about 10 or 10:30 before that natural energy ramps up, because it's fun and exciting to be up during that time, but then you're also not allowing those organs to do that restorative processing background work, which is fine once in a while, but if it's a habit and a routine and you're constantly getting way less sleep, it can be depleting over time.
That's very interesting. I actually am a wood element dominant person, according to your very good quiz online. And so thanks for diagnosing me right there, Dr. Liz.
You're welcome.
When do the other organs heal themselves? If it's like a, 10 a.m. to noon organ, that might be not the right hour frame, but, like I'm usually up doing things. If that's my, I don't know, spleen or something, like how is it getting its rest and healing?
Yeah, you're actually really close. Yeah, spleen is 9 to 11 a.m. and then 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. is heart. So and you actually went right over between, whenever there's a transition between organs. So not only is the clock important in terms of understanding which organs are associated with which hours, that's also a cycle of energy that your chi or energy is progressing through. So if there is an issue around a transition time, that's the most common, like let's say 11 a.m., it means that maybe your spleen and your heart are not communicating the way that they should be. And there are treatments in 5 elements that help to open and remove those blocks so your chi can actually flow smoothly again. So there's just so many things that it's so helpful. And, spleen being a major digestive organ, it can be a really, really nice time to already have had your breakfast and then really focus on your work. It can be an incredibly productive time, even though we think about, wood element being really productive. The spleen's spirit, which is known as the yi, really helps a lot with concentration and focus. So if your spleen is really healthy, a lot of times you can get a ton done and go really deep with your work during that time. And if it's a little out of balance, you might feel foggy and spacey and probably get some sugar cravings, because the spleen loves sugar. Well, it loves to taste sweet, and but mildly sweet things like potato or oats or pumpkin, rather than like sugar, which will kind of overdo it for the spleen and deplete it. So that was a long answer, but hopefully that was helpful.
No, that was lovely. And what it sort of brought home to me was that this is an extraordinary complex system with a lot of different parts. So when you said earlier, like the best thing to do if you really want to know is go see a professional, like I was like, oh yeah, this is not a thing I can just like hope to do on my own, even with your really great online guidance. But yeah, all of the timing. I just wanted to say real quick, would you just give us a brief definition of chi?
Yeah, I would just say chi is, I think the way we can think of it within ourselves and the universe is energy. It can be a life force, it can be vitality. And in Chinese medicine, it's believed that, we share chi with nature, and then chi is a part of everything. So everything in the world is connected. And you can see that you were just speaking to like the intricacy of the medicine and all of the connections, that, yeah, everything is interconnected, and that can make it really intimidating to learn at first, but it's also kind of fascinating when you start to really see those pieces come together, especially in your own body and mind.
I was just going to ask, when you were studying, did you just feel like every day was this new self-revelation type thing?
Honestly, yeah, a lot of that, where it just so much of it hit home, where it was like, oh, well, that's why that makes so much sense. And, even as like, a wood person, you might have pain along your liver and gallbladder channels more than somebody else. And gallbladder runs up the side of your leg and your back and up to like the base of your skull. And then liver is kind of on the inside of your leg. So it's really interesting once you understand those elements, and then you understand their correlations mentally and emotionally and physically, so much starts to come into focus in your life and be like, oh, well, that's not a random thing, that my body's actually telling me in a subtle way that, oh yeah, okay, that liver is a little out of balance, or whatever it is. Mm-hmm.
Fascinating. Since we can't all go see you because you live in Seattle area, how do we find a practitioner in our area? Is there like a list of uh, credentialed, I don't know, like how do we find somebody and know for sure that they know their stuff?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There are a couple avenues that you can explore. So, number one is the NCCAOM, which is the National Accrediting Organization of Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine. So, it's nccaom.org. And I believe right at the top, they have a link that says find a practitioner. So, you can do that. You can put your zip code in, and only NCCOM accredited practitioners will show up, which is the vast majority of acupuncturists in the United States. It means that they went through at least, my program was 3 years. Some people, if they do a doctorate, it's 4 or 5 years, that folks have been through that much schooling. That search function does not separate, TCM docs versus 5E docs. So that's something that if you had a particular interest in type of medicine, you would just need to go, maybe call the office and ask that kind of thing. So yeah, there's not a great directory for each of those separately, but I think that's probably the best directory. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. I'll link that in the show notes, as I'm sure people are interested. A lot of times we're very interested in these things and we just have no idea where to start. So we give up.
Totally.
I mean, and so, yeah, so thank you for sharing that very much. So if I was thinking to myself, gosh, I'm going to just use myself. I'm a wood element. What are things that can you practice Chinese medicine on your own? Or do you need a doctor? Like, I can't prescribe myself antibiotics. I can't do acupuncture on myself. Like, I don't even know if you can. I know I cannot. Are there things that a person can do outside of professional guidance? And should we?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the beauty of Chinese medicine, is that there's so much that you can do yourself to at least help either between treatments or until you can get a treatment. And yeah, I think, nobody can I would not recommend doing acupuncture on yourself at
No,
all,
thank you.
because that's most of what we do in school, is like we learn proper placement, and then depth of needle is really important for the area of the body. But you can absolutely do an angle. You can absolutely do acupressure on yourself. Acupressure points are the same as acupuncture points, so any reference you find to that can be totally helpful. I usually recommend about 2 to 5 minutes of gentle stimulation over the point. You don't have to really grind your finger in there. It's meant to be relaxing, taking deep breaths, just to help your body kind of get in the mode and understand what you're accessing in that point. To me, it's helpful to understand, what organ it's correlated with. So you can also think about that. And if you know anything about the elements, and it's like, okay, well, that's a layer where I know this is going to help with my heartbreak that I'm experiencing, or my grief, or, my frustration or fear. So acupressure is one aspect. And I think my favorite way to help people start maybe understanding their health with Chinese medicine is really to spend more time in nature, because again, we learn so much about ourselves from observing the natural world and seeing how these elements interact with each other. And it's profoundly relaxing and healing to be in nature. So, and in our modern world, we often feel either disconnected from it, or like we can be better than nature and we can beat it, and we can kind of stay in our beautiful 72-degree air conditioned space all the time. And it's kind of wild, but in Chinese medicine, nature is us and we are nature. So if we're disconnecting from it, we're actually disconnecting from ourselves, and we're not listening to a part of ourselves. And I think that comes up a lot when people have mood issues around certain seasonal changes, or they struggle that way, and a lot of it to me is this difficulty in living with the energy of the season that's present, but that we are not acknowledging because modern society, one, doesn't acknowledge it, or two, allow us to follow the natural energy of that season.
So, like I was saying at the very beginning of this, how it's summer and I do great in the summer and I love to be outdoors. And so, and I've actually talked about this before, like the darkness of the winter is a time where we really start to turn inward, but our society is like, nope, it's just constant summer, constant production, constant go, go, go. The important thing is how much can you do? And so I'm interested in like mood struggles. I don't want to say disorders, but mood struggles with the seasonal change. And you find that's because we're fighting nature. We're not allowing our bodies, our chi, to be in harmony with nature's chi.
Yeah, I do. I'm not saying that that is the totality of an issue because I think there's a lot of variables, but yes, I do. And obviously that's my lens, so that's how I look at people, but I do think that is a big piece sometimes of seasonal issues. And like I have patients too who do have more trouble in the summer where they get really overly anxious and frenetic and they don't like the energy of that either because they're too overstimulated already and that's too much and that's not their natural energy, or it is their natural energy and it's just way too much, like it's amping up their fire element too much, which is the element in the summer. So
summertime.
And it's not always with like the water elements associated with winter. I have some water element folks who do struggle in the winter time. During your season you do tend to feel like the best or the most in harmony with yourself, but I also think that's if you can embrace the energy of that season, whereas winter is definitely restorative, slow, storage, how many resources do I have, kind of this conserving energy. And if you're not able to bring a little bit more of that into your life because your job's too demanding or whatever is happening, it can really hit you hard.
How does that work in parts of the world where the differentiation between seasons is very minute, right? Like some sort of equator or Central American countries I'm thinking of specifically, they have wet season and dry season. They don't really have summer and winter. So how does that work?
Yeah, that is a really good question. I mean, and to me, I guess the best way that I think about it is that no matter where you are in the world, there are always going to be subtle seasonal shifts that happen. And if you are in a place where it's not as obvious, that can actually be a really good practice to see what you can observe. Like, when do you feel that shift happen? And there are specific seasonal points to there in Chinese medicine. There's a 24-point calendar about seasonal transitions. So for example, the one that we're coming up on here, August, I believe it's 8th, it's either 7th or 8th, is the beginning of fall energy. So summer is not over, of course, but summer energy has been waning since the solstice. The solstice is the peak of summer energy in Chinese medicine, not the beginning of it, which is how most people think about it.
Yes.
So it can be really nice when these transitions are coming up to just see if you can feel those shifts. What happens? Is the air a little bit drier because that's the climate of the fall, is this dryness. And in some places it's very damp, which this is a little complicated time of year because we also have late summer, which is the season of Earth, and the climate is dampness. So that's coming up in mid-August. But that's kind of how I encourage people to tune in, especially around where the seasonal energy starts to shift and maybe the other one starts to come in, is to look for that. What plants are growing, what plants are dying off? How are you feeling? I know personally for me, because I'm metal primary, in that like first or second week of August, I feel a relief where that like frenetic energy of summer has come down. The fire energy has decreased enough that you can start to feel that fall energy, which is the season of the metal element, come in. So it's really interesting when you know those correlations and can look for them and just observe what happens in you and what happens in nature.
And that goes right to back what you were saying, is spend time in nature, spend time noticing the subtle changes in your natural environment and in your body. So if fire is the element of summer and metal is the element of fall and water is the element of winter, there's spring, and then there's a poor fifth element that doesn't get a season.
So that's a really let's start with spring. Spring is wood.
Okay.
So yep, and spring usually starts around early February when that energy starts to come in, and then it peaks at the equinox. And then yeah, so the earth element, seasonally Earth is really interesting. So there is technically an Earth season called late summer, which is from about mid-August to the equinox, sometimes a little bit longer if you're having a really nice, like kind of what we would used to call like Indian summer, right? Where it's kind of just pleasant and warm. Yeah, and time in late summer is really interesting. Is it kind of seems to stand still, where the days are the most balanced between yin and yang energy. Yin is that cooling, restorative, slowing force that's stronger in the fall and winter. And yang is that like bright, active, energetic that we get in the spring and summer. So late summer is that balance point for the whole year between those two. So and Earth also shows up between the transitions of seasons, which is kind of wild. So because it is meant to stabilize and balance every element, so it can kind of show up at those points too. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that reminds me of when you were saying like sometimes the circle has the four elements and then the earth in the middle. And
Yep.
so, the earth is obviously present during every season because, well, it's the earth. So that is
Mm-hmm.
really wonderful. I think you're just basically a genius, honestly, listening to all of these things. I'm so interested and I'm so fascinated. And I think that probably a lot of us in the Western world are missing out on a lot of really valuable and necessary healing by sort of ignoring this ancient tradition. Can I ask you a question about like the development of Chinese medicine? Who practiced it? Was there like town doctors or shamans, or did people practice it in their homes, or was there less need for it because historically we like to think of our ancestors as being more connected to the earth? Um, how did how did it work then when we didn't go to an office?
Yeah, I mean, this is an area that I wish that I knew more about. My history was very light in school, but from my mentor, yeah, I mean, there were definitely physicians that were trained in Chinese medicine, who were town doctors. And then I think it was the same thing where this was not meant to be a medicine that, was behind closed doors. It was also a lot of this and the Taoist principles and practices that we're talking about with the connection to nature, that was part of the culture and that's understood and part of the culture. So a doctor might help to rebalance certain things or give you herbs to certain things, but I think a lot of the culture was already connected in that way. And again, that's my very very surface level understanding. The one thing that I found really interesting from my mentor too, at least I used to think about, olden times, right? I was like, oh, well, of course, the doctors they were way more well versed in like physical ailments because that must have been what people were really struggling with back then because we didn't have modern medicine and all these other wonderful modern things that we have. And, from his understanding of the medicine and research, he said, no, a lot of it was mental and emotional treatment too, that really helped, that made the difference. And I thought that was super fascinating. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's incredibly fascinating. And I do think about that every so often. Like human beings are human beings. We've always had grief and loss and longing for things. And there have always been people who are like, no, let's stay at home. And always people who are like, let's explore the world. And we've all throughout history had all of these like emotions. And we tend to think of ourselves, oh, it's modern. It's so different now. But like as human beings, maybe it's not quite so different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So.
absolutely. And I did just want to say one thing too, where I mean, thank you so much for your praise about being a genius. But I also want to reinforce for everybody too who's listening who wants to experience Chinese medicine, like I'm not unique in what I know. If you go see an acupuncturist or a Chinese medicine practitioner, like they're going to understand the same correlations, for the most part. So there is that wealth of knowledge within the medicine that's really widespread. It's just not very well known.
Right. You are all trained in the tradition. And so there's going to be some consistency between what you know. What you do really well, at least for me, is teach it in a way that makes sense to me that I can understand. So I thank you for that. Dr. Liz, I already follow you on Instagram and read your emails every time you send them out. how can people find you, out more about you, what you do?
Yeah, I think I am really active on Instagram right now, so that's a great place to start with. I'm just Dr. Liz Carter on Instagram. You're also welcome to visit my website, which is drlizcarter.com. There's a lot of good resources on there with some freebies, and like the personality test is on there. There's some blogs about the 5 elements and the seasons. All of that great stuff. And if you are interested in like the seasonal correlations, and there's even like foods associated with each season, and
Amazing.
it's super fun. Yeah, so you can learn to eat seasonally according to Chinese medicine, or if you know your element, then it's like, what, I'm a fire element and it's winter, but I'm going to eat some fire element foods because that's what I feel like. You can do that with, there's a free guide that's called Taste of the Seasons that you can also download on my website, and you get little updates throughout each season of the foods and recipes, and a little understanding of what that taste means according to Chinese medicine.
That's so cool. You also do a variety of courses and things. So if people really want to get in depth and learn things, there's information about that on your website, I imagine.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Yeah, I'm currently really trying to build that out right now, and there are 2 workshops correlated with the Chinese clock, like we just talked about, where if that's fascinating and you want to learn about the organs overnight and how they're connected to your sleep, there's an Improve Your Sleep with Chinese Medicine course, and then there's one called Improve Your Energy, Mood, and Focus, which kind of completes the 24-hour cycle, so you can learn about the daytime organs. So that's really fun. Yeah.
That is really fun. Thank you so, so very much for your time today. I just appreciate all of your knowledge and your generosity. Is there anything else that you'd like people to know about you or about Chinese medicine or our way of thinking about it before we go?
Hmm. Yeah, I think with Chinese medicine, it's just realizing that it can offer so much more than we give it credit for sometimes. If you have elbow pain, wonderful, but realize that you're probably going to walk out of a treatment feeling less stressed and maybe even better about yourself, which is powerful. And also, I would not, I get it if you're needle phobic, but in general, the needles really don't hurt. They're pretty comfortable. That depends on your practitioner, but I know a lot of people have a lot of trepidation around it specifically because of the needles. And
Sure.
if you have a good practitioner, they will take the time to make you comfortable and explain the needles and what they're like and what they're going to feel like. So, if that's a barrier, then, find somebody who's willing to educate you and talk to you about, what you're uncomfortable about. And there are plenty of practitioners out there who are great and will do that.
Lovely. Well, thank you, Dr. Liz, for your time. I appreciate what you're doing, and I look forward to staying connected with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was super fun.